President, we are in the 10th week of the first 10 weeks, obviously, of the Senate's session. It's been exceptionally productive during this time period. We've not only moved more nominees into confirmation for President Trump than any Senate has done in more than 2 decades. We passed bills like the Laken Riley Act, which will absolutely help us in trying to be able to remove criminal aliens out of the country. We've rolled back a lot of Biden's last-minute regulations that he literally threw in the final hours that did not have the oversight, did not have the appearance, and they obviously didn't do it in the first 3.5 years of their term. They stalled it to the very end on that for a reason, because it was unpopular with the American people. Those have been rolled back, many of them, and we still have several to go. Today, we're finishing out a bill called Halt Fentanyl. The fentanyl epidemic is raging in our country. If you go back to just 2019 and compare that to 2023, in that short period of time, in my state of Oklahoma, in 2019, we had 50 people that died of fentanyl. Fast forward 4 years to 2023, the last year we still have we have complete records on, that is actually 730 people died. In 2023, across the country, we had 74,000 Americans that died from fentanyl overdose. Again, go back to 2019, only about 10% of the opioid deaths in my state had fentanyl connected to it. Fast forward to 2023, 90% of the fentanyl deaths are related to fentanyl. What the Mexican cartels are doing and what Chinese precursor chemicals coming into our country are causing is the death of our fellow citizens as they slip it into different fake pills, as they slip it into methamphetamine, as they slip fentanyl into cocaine, as they slip it into different places to have someone who's using a drug or someone who never intended to use that drug to take their life. It has to stop. Even worse, the cartels not only know what they're doing, but they're trying to find specific ways to be able to avoid our laws. Fentanyl has a very specific definition in science of exactly what makes up fentanyl. And so what the cartels are doing is they're changing that chemical makeup ever so slightly in what they call an analog, and so it's really not fentanyl as a definition. Meaning law enforcement, when they see it on the street, it has the same effect. It still kills you, but it's actually technically not fentanyl, so you can't be prosecuted for it. This bill that we're bringing to the floor today opens up the fentanyl definition to deal with fentanyl and the analogs of fentanyl, so that the cartels can't continue to be able to bring in these deadly drugs into our country to take the lives and increase addiction in America and get away with it. This puts in the hands of law enforcement, where they've been disarmed in that area, enforcement priorities so they can actually enforce the law on these cartels and on the drug dealers. And so we can identify it for what it really is. It's a killer drug. The Halt Fentanyl Act is incredibly important. And I'm fully aware, in a week where our country is talking about, are we going to have another government shutdown? It's going to slip through and people aren't even going to notice it. But law enforcement will notice it, and families in the future will notice it. Folks aren't dealing with this same addiction, as we're putting one more piece out there to be able to take this on. And Mr. President, as we talk about the government shutdown looming tonight at midnight, I want to remind you in this body again, this is something I've spoken out on for years. Years ago, I sat down with my Democratic colleagues and said, how do we take government shutdowns off the table? How do we end this? There's been proposals for literally decades to be able to end government shutdowns. Republicans have had a proposal for decades that said, well, if we get to the end of the fiscal year and we haven't passed all the bills, we'll just cut spending 1% every month, and that'll force us to come to the table. And my Democratic colleagues have said to me over and over again, you guys are so crazy about reducing federal spending, you'll never reopen the government, it'll just cut funding every single month and it's easy. I'm never gonna vote for that. My Democratic colleagues literally have a bill to say we'll end government shutdowns by every single month that we don't have a bill passed on it. We'll increase funding by 1% every single month. And Republicans have looked at our Democrat colleagues and said, you've lost your mind. You want to increase spending every single month anyway. You'll never pass another bill. We're never going to do that. There's a bill that sat out there for a while that sounds great called No Budget, No Pay, that says if we don't pass our budget, we don't get our appropriations work done, then members of Congress won't be paid. And a lot of people say, that's a great idea. I smile at folks back home and I say, I hate to be blunt, but do you know how much most members of the Senate are worth? Their congressional salary for many of my colleagues is a rounding error to their investment portfolio. They're really not worried about their congressional pay to be able to make ends meet at the end of that month. In addition to that, constitutionally, you actually can't change a member's pay during the time that they're actually set. So all it would mean is they wouldn't get their paycheck for however long it took to negotiate it, then they'd still get their money. That's really not going to make a difference. When I sat down with my Democratic colleagues several years ago and said, what's the one pressure point that we all feel that we can hold the American people harmless but actually get our work done, it's the same thing. Rich or poor, live far away, live close, all of us have the same precious possession that we're all attentive to, and it's time. We all have the same amount of time in a day, and we all fight our calendars because they're full. So our simple solution to end government shutdowns is if we get to the end of a fiscal year, like we are at tonight, and we haven't got our work done, like it's happening so far, government stays open, same year's level as last year, nothing changes on it. The American people are held harmless, all the agencies are held harmless, but members of Congress, both House and Senate, we stay in session 7 days a week. We have a quorum call at noon every single day, and we can't move to any bill other than appropriations. In other words, if you don't have your work done, you've got to stay until your work's actually done. And we can't go do something else. We have to stay here to be able to get it done. I guarantee you, if this body was in session 7 days a week for 2 weeks, by the end of the second week, we would all be staring at each other saying, I want to go see my family. I want to be able to do the other things that are responsibilities that a senator has. I need to be able to do those things. Let's get this resolved. If you remove all of our time, it puts the pressure on us to be able to actually get our work done. If I can say it just as simple as this, my mom, when my brother and I know it may be shocking to some people that my brother and I didn't always get along every day growing up, but when my brother and I would get into a fight, my mom would send both of us into one of our rooms and say, you guys stay in that room, fight it out. When you're done, then you can come out to the rest of the house. But go settle it in there, but make sure it's settled before you come out here. As silly as it sounds, this government shutdown prevention bill that I've brought year after year is just as simple as my mom's advice. Don't make everybody else have to listen to the fight. Members of Congress should get in the room, fight it out, settle it, and when we're done, we come out and actually vote for it. But in the meantime, the rest of the country shouldn't have to suffer because we didn't get our work done on time. That seems pretty straightforward to me. It's had wide bipartisan support, and there have been lots of moments we've been very close to passing it. There's no trick in it. There's no anything else. It's just, why do we have these crazy government shutdown fight moments that the rest of the world looks at us as Americans and says, why can't the Americans get their act together? And the rest of the country looks at us and says, we have to work out all the details. Why don't you guys have to work out all your details? Those folks are not wrong. We will one day solve this. Apparently, it's not today. Today, there's still a fight over whether we're going to keep the government open for tomorrow. Federal workers that are already dealing with a lot of tension in their life, quite frankly, they've gotten emails and messages. They're hearing about downsizing in federal agencies. They're anxious right now. And there are a lot of folks in my state and quite frankly around the country that say we need to reduce the size of the bureaucracy, which we do. The last time we had a major reduction in the size of the bureaucracy was under Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was president, he declared we're going to reinvent government. And under Bill Clinton's presidency, they reduced the federal workforce by 400,000 people. It was a big reduction in federal workforce. That's the last time that's occurred, decades ago. We've grown now to a massive size that we've got to reduce again. Everybody knows it, but if you're a federal worker or a family member or a next-door neighbor, you go to church together, you know how agonizing this really is. The last thing those federal workers need is one more thing hanging over their head of a government shutdown at the same time. But it's being debated right now, and my Democratic colleagues are trying to determine if we're going to go into shutdown tonight still. I would simply say, let's get our work done. We disagree on many issues, okay? That's what grown-ups have. We have disagreements. Let's settle our disagreements. Let's keep us operating. Let's take this off the table for good at some point so we don't have this threat hanging over us and some countdown clock on 24-hour news. Here's how many minutes it is until we have a government shutdown. Let's take that off the table and let's get our work done. We have a giant deficit, giant, $2 trillion in overspending this year. We should have budget fights. We should be more efficient. We should allow DOJ and some of those folks to be able to go after some of the wasteful spending. I don't have a lot of people back in my state that are contacting me and saying, I really want to make sure that we're still spending all that money for the grants to go to the transgender opera in Colombia that USAID is funding, or the DEI initiatives in Serbia that USAID is funding. No one's calling me and saying, we need to make sure we keep doing those things. Everyone looks at it and shakes their head and says, what in the world? I want my tax money to go to education, and I want it to go to roads, and I want it to go to national defense. Don't do that. So let's find ways to be more efficient. Let's find ways to be able to reduce waste and fraud. But let's also have the fight during office hours so the American people don't have to feel the effect of a government shutdown. Clock's ticking today. My Democratic colleagues have got to determine if we're going to have this vote today. Let's pass it. I yield the floor.